The royal chamber smelled of cedar smoke and something softer, something that shouldn't have been there at all. Eldris woke to dawn light slicing through velvet curtains, his body warm, his wolf quiet. Too quiet. He turned his head. The sheets beside him still held her shape. The pillow still carried the ghost of her scent, lavender, earth, something faintly bitter he couldn't name. But Patricia? Gone. He sat up slowly, letting the silence settle around him like accusation. The fire had burned down to embers. The water pitcher on the side table remained untouched. No note. No jewelry left behind. No deliberate trace of passage. Just absence. And that wrongness in his chest where his wolf should have been pacing, snarling, demanding answers. Instead, there was only calm. The kind of calm that felt like grief. Eldris swung his legs over the edge of the bed and pressed his palms against his thighs, breathing deep. Her scent was there, faint and fractured, but when he pulled it into his lungs, it dissolved too quickly. Not faded. Cut. Deliberate. She had masked herself. Which meant she hadn't fled in panic. She had planned this. He stood and crossed to the window, bare feet silent on cold stone. Beyond the glass, the capital sprawled in pale morning light, rooftops layered like scales, smoke rising from bakers' chimneys, the distant clang of smithy hammers already ringing through the trade district. The kingdom waking. The kingdom moving. The kingdom continuing as though nothing had shifted. But something had. Eldris closed his eyes and let himself remember. 3 nights ago, the seasonal conclave had begun. Alpha lords from every corner of the realm had descended on the capital, each one bringing entourages, grievances, and barely concealed threats wrapped in etiquette. They filled the great hall with posturing and politics, their wolves bristling beneath pressed uniforms and ceremonial sashes. Eldris had presided over it all from the high seat, his face a mask of control, his wolf a caged thing clawing at his ribs. Every dispute. Every territorial claim. Every thinly veiled challenge to his authority. He had mediated them with restraint that felt like swallowing glass. By the second night, his temples throbbed. His jaw ached from clenching. His wolf prowled so close to the surface that his vision bled gold at the edges, and he had to excuse himself twice just to breathe in private corridors where no one could see him shake. Then she walked into the room. He hadn't noticed her at first. She was part of the background, one of the Omega attendants assigned to scent-dampening duty during high-stress gatherings. She moved along the perimeter of the hall with a brass sensor, releasing thin trails of calming smoke that softened the aggression in the air. Her head was lowered. Her movements practiced. She wore the plain linen dress of palace staff, her dark hair braided and pinned close to her skull. Everything about her said, "Do not see me." But Eldris had looked up from a lord's droning complaint about fishing rights, and his gaze had snagged on her like a hook. She was passing behind the row of seated dignitaries, her step soundless, her presence so carefully erased that even the alphas she walked past didn't turn their heads. And yet, Eldris watched her. Watched the way her fingers moved over the sensor chain, steady and sure. Watched the way she paused for half a breath when one of the lords raised his voice, adjusting the incense flow without looking up. Watched the way exhaustion clung to her shoulders like a cloak she'd learned to carry without complaint. Then she lifted her eyes. Just for a moment. Just long enough to meet his gaze across the crowded hall. And something in Eldris went still. Not his wolf. His wolf surged forward, interested, alert, but not aggressive. It was Eldris himself who went still. The man beneath the crown. The part of him that had been holding his breath for years. She looked away first, lowering her head again, but the moment had already lodged itself in his chest like a splinter. He didn't know her name yet. Didn't know anything about her except that she existed to be invisible and that her eyes, when they met his, had held the same exhaustion he saw in his own reflection every morning. The conclave dragged on. Eldris forced himself to focus, to arbitrate, to hold the realm together with words and presence and the threat of violence he never wanted to use. But he kept looking for her. And every time he found her in the room, his wolf settled. Not subdued. Not leashed. Settled. Like something inside him recognized something inside her. On the third night, after the hall had finally emptied and the lords had retreated to their guest quarters, Eldris remained in the council antechamber, reviewing treaty drafts by candlelight. His head pounded. His hands ached. His wolf circled restlessly, agitated by hours of forced diplomacy. Then the door opened. He looked up, ready to dismiss whatever servant had come to clear the wine glasses. But it was her. She froze in the doorway, a tray balanced in her hands, her eyes wide. Eldris set down his quill. Neither of them spoke. She should have apologized. Should have bowed. Should have backed out of the room immediately. Instead, she stood there, and he watched her decide. Watched her weigh flight against something else. Then she stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The tray held a single glass of water and a small plate of bread and cheese. Servant's practicality. The kind of offering that said, "You haven't eaten." She crossed the room without looking at him directly and set the tray on the edge of the table, her movements careful and deliberate. Eldris didn't reach for the food. He said, "What's your name?" Her hands stilled on the tray. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, quietly, "Patricia." Her voice was low and clear, without the deference most Omegas used in his presence. Not disrespectful. Just human. "Patricia," he repeated, tasting the shape of it. She finally looked at him, and this time she didn't look away. "You should eat, Your Majesty." "I should do a lot of things." The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile, but she controlled it. Eldris leaned back in his chair, studying her. She didn't fidget. Didn't lower her eyes. Didn't perform submission. She just stood there, present, tired, real. "Why are you still awake?" he asked. "Same reason you are." "And what reason is that?" "Too much noise in your head to sleep." Something in his chest loosened. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." She hesitated, and he saw the calculation in her eyes. Saw her measure the risk. Then she sat. Not because he commanded it. Because she chose to. They didn't speak much after that. Eldris ate the bread slowly, and Patricia poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher she'd brought. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of things neither of them said. When he finally stood to leave, she stood as well. And when he paused at the door and looked back at her, she was already watching him. "Will you come tomorrow night?" he asked. It wasn't a command. It was a question. She considered it for a long moment. Then nodded. The next night, after the conclave sessions ended, Eldris returned to his chambers instead of the antechamber. He didn't summon her. Didn't send a messenger. He simply waited. And an hour past midnight, there was a soft knock at his door. He opened it. Patricia stood in the corridor, her hair unbraided now, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She wore the same plain dress, but something about her was different. Looser. Less hidden. She met his gaze. "May I come in?" Eldris stepped aside. She entered, and he closed the door behind her. What happened next wasn't ceremony. Wasn't claiming. Wasn't alpha dominance asserting itself over omega submission. It was two people stepping outside the roles they'd been assigned. They sat by the fire first, not touching, just talking in low voices about nothing important. She told him about growing up in the palace service quarters, learning to read emotions in a room before she could read words on a page. He told her about the weight of inherited authority, the way every decision he made carried the lives of thousands. She didn't offer comfort. She offered understanding. And when the conversation finally trailed into silence, and he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. She leaned into him. There was no power play. No commands. No performance. Just recognition. His wolf, for the first time in years, went quiet. Not because it was forced. Because it didn't need to fight. They moved to the bed slowly, carefully, every touch a question answered with presence. She didn't kneel. He didn't dominate. They simply existed together in a space where titles dissolved and only breath and warmth and skin remained. When she fell asleep against his chest, her hand resting over his heart, Eldris stared at the ceiling and felt something he hadn't felt since he was a child. Peace. He woke to dawn light and silence. And absence. Now, standing at the window, Eldris pressed his palm against the cold glass and let the truth settle over him. She hadn't fled because she was afraid. She had left because staying would have made her a target. And she had masked her scent so thoroughly that even he, with his alpha senses, could barely trace her. Which meant she understood exactly what she was doing. His wolf stirred, not with rage, but with something deeper. Loss. Eldris turned from the window and dressed quickly, pulling on riding leathers instead of formal robes. He strapped his blade to his hip and moved through the palace corridors with purpose, his boots echoing on stone. Servants stepped aside as he passed. Guards straightened. No one questioned where he was going. He reached the stables as the sun broke fully over the eastern hills. His horse, a gray stallion with intelligent eyes, stamped and snorted as Eldris saddled him with practiced efficiency. A voice called from behind him. Your Majesty. Eldris didn't turn. He recognized the voice. Lord Counselor Thorn, Chief Advisor, and constant thorn in his side. The conclave sessions resume in 2 hours. Your presence is required. Eldris tightened the saddle strap and finally looked over his shoulder. Thorn stood at the stable entrance, his expression carefully neutral. I'm leaving, Eldris said. Leaving? Cancel the sessions. Adjourn the conclave. Send the lords home. Thorn's eyes narrowed. On whose authority? Mine. Eldris mounted the stallion in one smooth motion, gathering the reins. Thorn stepped forward. This is highly irregular. The Alpha Lords will take offense. There are matters of territorial dispute that require your immediate attention. Then they'll wait. Your Majesty, if I may ask, where exactly are you going? Eldris met the counselor's gaze and saw something flicker there. Not confusion. Satisfaction. Too much satisfaction. The realization settled in his gut like cold iron. Thorn knew. Knew Patricia was gone. Knew she'd been dismissed, erased, removed from consideration. Expected Eldris to let it go. Eldris leaned forward in the saddle, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. Nowhere that concerns you. He spurred the horse forward, and Thorn had to step aside or be trampled. The gates of the capital opened before him, and Eldris rode through without looking back. Behind him, the kingdom continued its routines. Councils convened. Lords postured. Treaties waited for signatures. But Eldris had stopped listening to the noise. Because for the first time in his reign, he understood something fundamental. Power wasn't control. Power was choice. And he was choosing her. The road stretched ahead, empty and open. The wind carried 1,000 scents: grass, smoke, distant rain, the musk of deer in the forest. And beneath it all, faint as a whisper, fractured but deliberate, a trail only he could follow. Lavender. Earth. Bitter herbs. Patricia. His wolf stirred, not raging, not demanding. Grieving. And the hunt began. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Patricia moved through the pre-dawn streets of the capital with the practiced invisibility of someone who had spent a lifetime learning to disappear. She kept to the servant corridors first, the narrow passages behind the palace walls where kitchen staff and laundresses moved in perpetual shadow. No one looked at her. No one questioned her presence. She was just another body in linen, another pair of hands fulfilling another forgettable task. She had left Eldris sleeping. Had watched his chest rise and fall in the firelight, his face finally relaxed, the tension that lived in his jaw softened by exhaustion and something else. Something she didn't have a name for but recognized in the way his hand had curled around hers even in sleep. She had memorized the shape of that moment. Then she had slipped from the bed, dressed in silence, and walked away. Not because she wanted to. Because staying would have killed him. The realization had come 2 hours before dawn, when she'd woken pressed against his side, his arm heavy and warm across her waist, his breath steady against her hair. She had lain there, listening to the quiet, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Then she'd heard the voices. Faint. Muffled. Coming from somewhere below the royal chambers. She had eased out of bed carefully, pulled on her dress, and moved to the door. Pressed her ear against the wood. 2 voices. Male. One she recognized immediately as Lord Councillor Thorne. The other belonged to High Steward Renwick, the man who oversaw all palace operations. Their words had been low, but she'd caught enough. The king spent the night with an Omega. Which one? The scent damper. Patricia. From the service quarter. A pause. Then Thorne's voice, calm and cold. Unfortunate. But manageable. You want her removed? Quietly. Before the conclave lords hear of it. An Alpha King bedding a servant Omega is one thing. An Alpha King forming an attachment? That's a liability. What if she's already bonded? Then we'll handle it appropriately. Either way, she leaves the capital before sunrise. No record. No trace. Understood? Understood. Patricia had stepped back from the door, her heart hammering, her mind already moving through options. She could wake Eldris. Tell him what she'd heard. But what would that accomplish? He would confront the council. Demand answers. Assert his authority. And the council would smile and nod and apologize and promise to investigate. Then they would wait. Wait for him to leave the capital on royal business. Wait for him to turn his attention to another crisis. And when his gaze was elsewhere, they would finish what they'd started. Not publicly. Not violently. Just quietly. The way they handled all inconvenient problems. She had learned long ago that Omegas without lineage, without family name, without political value, were expendable. Especially when their existence threatened the carefully maintained order of power. Eldris might be king, but the council held the kingdom together. They managed the lords. They brokered the treaties. They whispered in the right ears and applied pressure in the right places. And an Omega servant who had somehow claimed the king's attention? That was a threat they would eliminate. Not because they hated her, but because they couldn't afford the disruption. So Patricia had made her choice. She had returned to the bed, pressed a kiss to Eldris's temple so softly he didn't wake, and whispered words he wouldn't remember. I'm sorry. Then she had gathered the herbs she kept hidden in her satchel, the ones she used for masking scent during heavy conclave sessions, and applied them with precision. Crushed bitter root on her pulse points. Lavender oil mixed with ash across her collarbone. A paste of pine resin and crushed mint rubbed into her hair. It wouldn't erase her scent entirely. But it would fracture it, scatter it, make it nearly impossible to track. Then she had walked out. Now, 3 hours later, she moved through the trade district as the city began to wake. Bakers opened shutters. Merchants unloaded carts. Morning bells rang from the cathedral tower. Patricia kept her head down and her steps purposeful, blending into the flow of early risers. She had a plan. Not a perfect one. But enough. She would head east, toward the border forests where Omega sanctuaries had once existed before the Crown outlawed them. Some still remained, hidden in the mountains, protected by elders who remembered the old ways. If she could reach them, she would be safe. Not because they could fight the Crown, but because they knew how to disappear completely. She passed through the eastern gate just as the sun broke over the hills, joining a caravan of traders heading toward the river towns. No one questioned her. She was just another traveler. Another face in the crowd. She walked for hours, putting distance between herself and the capital, her mind carefully blank. Don't think about his hands. Don't think about the way his wolf had gone quiet. Don't think about the look in his eyes when he'd asked her to stay. Just walk. By midday, the caravan stopped at a way station to water the horses. Patricia bought bread and dried fruit from a vendor, eating mechanically while sitting on a stone wall overlooking the road. She watched the horizon. Watched for riders. Watched for signs of pursuit. But the road remained empty. Which meant either the council hadn't told Eldris yet, or he hadn't decided to follow. Both possibilities hurt in different ways. She finished her meal and rejoined the caravan, walking until her feet ached and the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. They made camp that night in a clearing near a stream. Patricia helped gather firewood, accepted a bowl of stew from the caravan cook, and found a spot at the edge of the camp to sleep. She lay on her bedroll, staring up at the stars, and let herself remember. The way Eldris had looked at her. Not as a king looking at a servant, but as a man recognizing something essential in another person. The way he had touched her. Carefully. Reverently. As though she were something precious instead of expendable. The way his wolf had settled. Not because she had power over it. But because, for once, it hadn't needed to fight. She closed her eyes and felt the tears slide hot down her temples. This was the right choice. The only choice. But it still felt like tearing herself in half. She fell into restless sleep and woke before dawn, her body trained to rise early. The camp was still quiet, the fire burned down to embers, the other travelers bundled in their blankets. Patricia sat up and reached for her satchel to check her supplies. Her hand froze. There, tucked into the side pocket where it shouldn't be, was a small leather pouch. She pulled it out slowly, her heart hammering. Inside, a handful of silver coins. Enough to buy passage on a ship or supplies for a month. And beneath the coins, a folded piece of parchment. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, precise, unfamiliar. It read, "You are not alone. Follow the eastern ridgeline to Valley Mount. The elders are expecting you." No signature. No explanation. Patricia stared at the note, her mind racing. Someone had helped her. Someone inside the palace. Someone who knew what the council planned and had moved to counter it. She folded the note carefully and tucked it back into the pouch, her thoughts spinning. This changed nothing. She still couldn't go back. But it meant she wasn't as isolated as she'd thought. And it meant someone was watching. The caravan moved out at first light. Patricia walked with them for another day, then peeled away at a crossroads, claiming she had family in a nearby village. The traders wished her well and continued on. Patricia turned north, toward the mountains. The terrain grew rougher. The road narrowed into a trail, then into barely marked paths through dense forest. She walked alone, using the sun to navigate, stopping only when exhaustion forced her to rest. On the third day, she reached the ridgeline. The view opened up before her, valleys layered in mist, peaks cutting sharp against the sky, and in the distance, barely visible, a cluster of stone structures built into the mountainside. Valley Mount. Patricia adjusted her pack and started down the slope. She didn't know what she would find there. Didn't know if the elders would help her or turn her away. But she kept walking. Because stopping meant thinking. And thinking meant remembering. And remembering hurt too much. Behind her, miles to the south, Eldris stood in the council chamber, his hands braced on the table, his eyes locked on Lord Councillor Thorn. Where is she? Thorn's expression remained neutral. I'm afraid I don't understand the question, Your Majesty. Patricia. The Omega attendant. Where is she? I believe she left the capital, sire. Servants come and go. It's not unusual. Did you dismiss her? I did not personally dismiss anyone, no. Did you order her removal? Thorn spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. Your Majesty, palace staffing is managed by the stewards. If a servant chose to leave, I would have no knowledge of the specifics. Eldris studied him, seeing the careful distance in his words, the way he deflected without lying outright. You're telling me no one in this palace knows where she went? I'm telling you that servants are not tracked once they leave service, Your Majesty. It would be impossible to monitor every individual who passes through these halls. Eldris straightened slowly. His wolf prowled just beneath his skin, not raging but watchful, waiting. Cancel the remaining conclave sessions. Send the lords home. Thorn blinked. Your Majesty, there are still territorial disputes that require mediation. They'll wait. With all due respect, the Alpha Lords will not appreciate being dismissed without resolution. Then they can lodge their complaints in writing. Eldris turned toward the door. Thorn's voice followed him. Where are you going, sire? Eldris paused, his hand on the doorframe. He didn't look back. To find what you tried to erase. He walked out of the council chamber, through the palace corridors, down to the stables. His horse was already saddled, as though someone had known he would need it. Eldris mounted and rode through the gates, leaving the capital behind. He didn't bring guards. Didn't bring advisors. Didn't bring the weight of the crown. Just himself, his wolf, and the fractured trail of a woman who had chosen to vanish rather than become a weapon held against him. The road stretched ahead, empty and waiting. Eldris leaned forward in the saddle and let his wolf rise to the surface, sharpening his senses. The scent was faint. Scattered. Deliberately masked. But it was there. Lavender. Earth. Bitter herbs. And beneath it all, something uniquely hers. He followed it east, through the trade district, past the city gates, along the caravan routes. The trail grew fainter with distance, but his wolf held it, patient and relentless. She had taught him something in a single night. That power without choice was just another form of cage. And he was done living in cages. The sun set behind him. The stars emerged overhead. And Eldris rode on, following the ghost of her scent, feeling his wolf settle into something that wasn't rage or dominance or need. Just grief. And determination. The moment his boots hit the open road, his wolf woke. Not raging. But grieving. And the hunt began. The first village Eldris reached was called Millbrook, a cluster of timber houses built around a water wheel that ground grain from the surrounding farms. He arrived at midday, his horse tired, his own body aching from 2 days of riding with minimal rest. The scent trail had led him here, faint but deliberate, threading through the market square like invisible smoke. He dismounted near the village well and let his horse drink while he scanned the crowd. People moved about their business, women carrying baskets, children chasing chickens, old men sitting on benches arguing about crop yields. Normal life. The kind of life that existed in the spaces between royal decrees and territorial disputes. A young boy noticed him first, his eyes going wide. Then a woman at the vegetable stall. Then the blacksmith pausing mid-swing at his anvil. Recognition rippled through the square like a stone dropped in still water. The Alpha King. Here. Without guards. Without banners. Without ceremony. People began to kneel. Eldris raised a hand, his voice carrying across the square. Don't. The words stopped them mid-motion, confusion flickering across their faces. He walked forward slowly, leading his horse. I'm not here as your king. I'm here looking for someone. A woman. Dark hair. Omega. She would have passed through here too, maybe 3 days ago. Silence. People exchanged glances. An older man, his beard streaked with gray, finally stepped forward. We see many travelers, Your Majesty. The trade road runs through here. This one would have been alone. Traveling on foot. Carrying a satchel. More silence. Then a woman spoke up, her voice hesitant. There was a woman. Came through with the merchant caravan. Bought bread. Didn't stay long. Eldris turned to her. Which direction did she go? The woman pointed north. Toward the highlands. But that road doesn't lead anywhere except abandoned settlements. Nothing up there but old ruins. Eldris nodded his thanks and moved to remount. The gray-bearded man stepped closer. Your Majesty, if I may. The highlands are dangerous this time of year. Rock slides. Bandits. No settlements for miles. If you're searching for someone, you'll need supplies. And rest. Eldris looked at him, seeing genuine concern in the old man's eyes. I appreciate the warning. At least take food. Water. You'll find nothing up there. Eldris hesitated, then accepted the offered provisions: dried meat, hard cheese, a water skin refilled from the well. The villagers gathered small offerings, pressing them into his hands with quiet insistence. He thanked them and rode north, leaving Millbrook behind. The trail climbed steadily into rougher terrain. Trees gave way to scrub brush and exposed stone. The air grew thinner, colder. His horse picked its way carefully over loose rocks, ears swiveling at every sound. Patricia's scent was stronger here, less fractured. She had stopped masking herself so heavily, either because she felt safer in the wilderness or because she was running low on herbs. Eldris followed it with single-minded focus, his wolf guiding him through instinct and memory. But as he climbed higher, he began to notice other things. A burned farmhouse, its roof collapsed, blackened timbers stark against the hillside. A well that had been filled with stones, deliberately destroyed. Fields gone fallow, overrun with weeds. He passed through what had once been a hamlet. The building still stood, but the doors hung open, windows dark and empty. No smoke from chimneys. No signs of life. Just absence. Eldris dismounted and walked through the ghost town slowly, his boots crunching on gravel. He peered into one of the houses. Furniture remained, a table, chairs, a cold hearth. But everything was covered in dust, untouched for months, maybe years. He stepped back out into the street and found a faded notice nailed to a post. The parchment was weathered, but he could still read it. By order of the Crown, this settlement is hereby dissolved. All residents are to relocate to authorized population centers. Unauthorized occupation of this territory is forbidden. Signed by the Royal Council. Dated 3 years ago. Eldris stared at the notice, something cold settling in his chest. He knew about settlement consolidations. The council had presented them as efficiency measures, gathering scattered populations into larger towns where resources could be better managed and taxed. He had signed off on the policy without much thought, trusting the council's assessment that it would strengthen the kingdom's infrastructure. But standing here, in this abandoned hamlet with its burned farms and destroyed wells, he realized what consolidation actually meant. Forced relocation. Communities dissolved. Lives uprooted. And anyone who resisted, quietly removed. He pulled the notice down and folded it, tucking it into his coat. Then he remounted and continued north. The trail took him through 2 more abandoned settlements over the next day and a half. Each one told the same story: homes left behind, fields gone wild, evidence of lives interrupted and scattered. In one village, he found a child's doll lying in the dirt. In another, a loom still threaded with half-finished cloth. Pieces of existence cut short. And with each discovery, his wolf grew quieter. Not subdued. Grieving. On the 3rd day after leaving Millbrook, Eldris crested a ridge and saw something that made him rein his horse to a stop. Below, nestled in a narrow valley, was another settlement. But this one was different. It was intact. Small houses with smoke rising from their chimneys. Gardens tended and green. Laundry hanging on lines. The sound of voices and laughter carrying faintly on the wind. And at the center of it all, a long low building made of stone, its roof covered in living moss. Eldris urged his horse down the slope, his senses sharpening. As he approached, he saw people moving through the settlement. Women carrying water. Men repairing a fence. Children playing near a stream. And they were all Omegas. Every single one of them. He reached the edge of the settlement and dismounted, leading his horse on foot. A woman noticed him first. She was older, gray-haired, her face weathered but kind. She set down the basket she was carrying and walked toward him, her posture calm and unafraid. "You're the Alpha King," she said. Not a question. Eldris nodded. "You're far from your throne." "I'm looking for someone." The woman studied him for a long moment, her eyes sharp and assessing. Then she gestured toward the stone building. "You should speak with Elder Miriam. Follow me." She led him through the settlement. People paused to watch him pass, their expressions curious but not hostile. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts. An old man sitting on a bench nodded in greeting. No one knelt. No one bowed. They simply watched. The stone building turned out to be a communal hall. The woman pushed open the heavy wooden door and motioned for Eldris to enter. Inside, the space was warm and lit by oil lamps. Long tables lined the walls. Shelves held jars of preserved food, bundles of dried herbs, woven baskets. The air smelled of bread and wood smoke and something faintly medicinal. At the far end of the hall, an elderly woman sat in a carved chair, her white hair braided and coiled at the nape of her neck. She wore simple robes, but there was authority in the way she sat, the way she looked up as Eldris entered. "Elder Miriam." "Your Majesty," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We weren't expecting royal company." Eldris approached and stopped a respectful distance away. "I'm not here in an official capacity." "Then why are you here?" "I'm tracking someone. An Omega woman named Patricia. Her trail leads north, toward these mountains. I believe she may have come this way." Miriam's expression didn't change. "And why are you tracking her?" "Because she matters to me." "Does she matter to you as a king? Or as a man?" Eldris met her gaze steadily. "As both." Miriam studied him for a long moment, then gestured to a bench. "Sit." Eldris hesitated, then sat. Miriam leaned forward, her hands folded in her lap. "Do you know what this place is?" "An Omega sanctuary. One of the last. Your council outlawed us years ago. Called us separatist. Dangerous. A threat to social order. I signed that decree." "We know." The words hung in the air between them. Eldris didn't look away. I didn't understand what I was signing. The council presented it as a security measure. They said unsanctioned settlements were breeding grounds for rebellion. And you believed them. I trusted them. Miriam nodded slowly. Trust is a luxury, Your Majesty. For people like us, trust is a weapon turned against us. Eldris felt the truth of that settle in his chest like a stone. Patricia, he said quietly. Is she here? Why should I tell you? Because I need to know she's safe. Safe from what? From my council. From the people who want to erase her because she matters to me. Miriam's eyes sharpened. And what will you do if you find her? Take her back to the capital? Make her your queen? Do you think that will protect her? Eldris opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. Because he didn't know. He hadn't thought past finding her. Hadn't considered what came after. Miriam saw the realization cross his face and nodded. You're learning. That's something, at least. She stood, moving to the window. Outside, children were playing near the stream, their laughter bright and unguarded. We exist here because we chose not to kneel, Miriam said. Because we remembered what Omegas were before your ancestors decided we were lesser. We were anchors. Balances. The ones who kept alphas from tearing themselves and their kingdoms apart. She turned to look at him. Your wolf is quiet right now. Have you noticed? Eldris hadn't, but as soon as she said it, he felt the truth. His wolf was calm. Watchful, but not restless. Not prowling. It's the land, Miriam continued. This valley is old. Built on Omega ground. Your instincts recognize it even if your mind doesn't. Eldris stood slowly. Will you tell me if Patricia is here? Miriam smiled faintly. She is. She arrived yesterday. Something in Eldris's chest loosened. Can I see her? That depends. On what? On whether you're here to claim her or listen to her. Eldris held her gaze. I'm here to listen. Miriam considered him for a long moment, then nodded. Follow me. She led him out of the hall, through the settlement, toward a smaller building on the eastern edge. The door was ajar, and through it, Eldris could see movement. Miriam stopped just outside. She knows you're here. She's been expecting you. Eldris looked at her sharply. How? Because she knows you. And because she left you a trail to follow. The realization hit him all at once. The fractured scent. The deliberate traces. The path that had led him through abandoned villages and broken settlements. She hadn't been running. She'd been teaching. Showing him what his kingdom had become while he sat on his throne and trusted the wrong people. Miriam stepped back. Go. But remember, Your Majesty. In this place, you have no authority. You're just a man. And she's just a woman. Whatever happens between you happens as equals, or it doesn't happen at all. Eldris nodded and moved toward the door. He pushed it open slowly. Inside, the room was simple, a bed, a table, a chair, a small hearth with a fire burning low. Shelves held books and jars of herbs. Sunlight streamed through a window, illuminating dust motes in golden shafts. And there, standing by the window with her back to him, was Patricia. She wore a plain dress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She didn't turn when he entered, but he saw her spine straighten, her shoulders shift. She knew he was there. Eldris closed the door behind him and stood just inside, waiting. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. You followed me. I did. Why? Because you left. That's not an answer. Eldris took a slow breath. Because when I woke up and you were gone, I felt something I haven't felt in years. Loss. And I realized I didn't want to lose you. Patricia turned then, and he saw her face fully for the first time since that night. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. Her expression was guarded but not closed. You don't even know me, she said. I know enough. You know what I let you see. One night. A few hours. That's not knowing someone. Then let me know you. She shook her head. You can't. Not the way you want to. Because if I go back with you, I become a target. A liability. Something your council will remove the moment they get the chance. I won't let them. You can't stop them. Not without dismantling everything they've built. And you won't do that. Won't I? Patricia studied him, searching his face. You rode through the abandoned villages. I did. You saw what consolidation really means. I did. And now you understand why I left. Eldris crossed the room slowly, stopping a few feet away from her. Close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight she carried. I understand that my kingdom is broken. I understand that I've been blind. And I understand that you didn't run because you were afraid. You left because you were trying to protect me. Patricia's jaw tightened. I left because staying would have made me a weapon they could use against you. And I refuse to be anyone's weapon. Then don't be. Be my partner. Help me fix what's broken. You can't fix it. Not from a throne. Not with the same people whispering in your ear. Then I'll stop listening to them. And do what? Disband the council? Rebuild the entire government? You're one man, Eldris. Even a king has limits. He reached out slowly and took her hand. She didn't pull away. I don't know what comes next, he said quietly. I don't know how to fix everything that's wrong. But I know I can't do it alone. And I know that when my wolf finally went quiet, it was because of you. Patricia's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears back. Your wolf went quiet because I'm an anchor. That's what omegas do. We balance. We calm. It's not magic. It's just biology. It's more than that. Is it? You know it is. She looked down at their joined hands, her thumb brushing across his knuckles. If I come back, she said slowly, everything changes. Your council will fight me. The Alpha Lords will see it as weakness. Half your kingdom will call you compromised. Let them. You say that now. But when the pressure comes, when the threats start, when they make you choose between me and the crown, what will you do? Eldris stepped closer, closing the distance between them. I'll choose you. You can't know that. I do know that. Because I've already made the choice. I left the capital. I left the throne. I followed you here. That's my answer. Patricia looked up at him, her eyes searching, wanting to believe but afraid to. They'll try to kill me, she whispered. Then we'll make sure they fail. How? I don't know yet. But we'll figure it out. Together. She closed her eyes, and this time the tears slipped free, tracking down her cheeks. Eldris raised his free hand and gently wiped them away. I'm not asking you to fix me, he said. I'm asking you to stand with me while I figure out how to be better. Not as a king. As a man. Patricia opened her eyes and looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and pressed her forehead against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her and held her close, feeling her shoulders shake with silent sobs. They stood like that for a long time, the sunlight shifting across the floor, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Finally, she pulled back enough to look up at him. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. What if we fail? Then we fail together. She laughed softly, the sound broken but real. Then she kissed him. Not with the careful hesitation of that first night, but with certainty. With choice. And when they finally broke apart, breathless, she whispered against his lips. If we do this, we do it my way. No claiming rituals. No public displays. No performance for the court. We build something real first. Understand? I understand. And you listen to the elders here. Learn what they know. Because if you're going to reshape your kingdom, you need to understand what it was supposed to be. I'll listen. She nodded, then stepped back, wiping her eyes. Then we have work to do. Eldris smiled, feeling something settle in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Not power. Not control. Purpose. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. And high in the mountains, barely visible from the settlement below, figures moved along the ridgeline. Council enforcers. Tracking the Alpha King. Closing in. The warning bell rang just before dawn. Eldris woke to the sound, his body already moving before his mind fully caught up. Patricia was already on her feet beside him, pulling on her boots, her face alert and focused. They had stayed in the small house at the edge of the settlement, talking late into the night with Elder Miriam and the other Omega leaders. Learning. Planning. Beginning to understand the scope of what needed to change. Now, someone was at the door, pounding hard. Patricia reached it first and pulled it open. A young man stood there, breathless, his face flushed. Enforcers. Coming down the eastern pass. At least a dozen riders. Maybe more. Eldris was at the door in 3 strides. How far? An hour. Maybe less. They're moving fast. Patricia turned to Eldris, her expression tight but calm. They followed you. I know. Then they're here for both of us. Eldris looked past her to the young messenger. Alert Elder Miriam. Get everyone to the central hall. Now. The young man nodded and ran. Eldris grabbed his coat and sword belt, buckling it quickly. Patricia was already moving through the room, gathering supplies with practiced efficiency, dried herbs, a water skin, a small knife. What are you doing? Eldris asked. Preparing to run if we have to. We're not running. She stopped and looked at him. Eldris, there are children here. Elders. People who can't fight. I know. That's why we're not running. If we run, they'll burn this place looking for us. If we stay, we end this. End it how? By making them choose. Patricia studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Then we do this together. Together. They left the house and moved quickly through the settlement. People were already emerging from their homes, moving toward the central hall as instructed. There was no panic, just swift, organized action. These people had drilled for this. Had prepared for the possibility that one day the crown would come for them. Elder Miriam stood at the entrance to the hall, directing people inside. When she saw Eldris and Patricia approaching, her expression was grim but unsurprised. How many? She asked. A dozen at least, Eldris said. Council enforcers. They're coming for me. And for Patricia. Miriam nodded. Then we make our stand here. No, Eldris said firmly. You get everyone inside and bar the doors. Patricia and I will meet them at the valley entrance. This doesn't involve your people. It involves all of us, Your Majesty. The moment you set foot in this valley, you made it involve us. I won't let them hurt you because of me. Miriam smiled faintly. You misunderstand. We're not afraid of them. We've been waiting for this confrontation for years. The only question was when it would come. She turned and called out to several people near the hall. They moved immediately, disappearing into storage buildings and emerging moments later with staffs, bows, and hunting knives. Not an army. Not soldiers. Just people ready to defend their home. Eldris felt something shift in his chest. These were his people. Not because they knelt to him, but because they existed in his kingdom, and he had failed to protect them. Patricia touched his arm. We need to move. If they reach the settlement, this gets worse. She was right. Eldris turned to Miriam. Keep everyone inside until this is resolved. If things go wrong, if Patricia and I fall, you scatter. Disappear into the mountains. Don't try to fight them. Miriam met his gaze steadily. If things go wrong, Your Majesty, we won't be the ones running. There was no time to argue. Eldris, Patricia, and a small group of Omega defenders moved quickly toward the eastern pass, the narrow entrance to the valley where the terrain funneled into a bottleneck. It was defensible ground. If the enforcers wanted into the valley, they would have to come through here. They reached the pass just as the sun broke over the peaks, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Eldris positioned himself at the center of the pass, Patricia beside him. The Omega defenders spread out along the higher ground, bows ready but not drawn. A show of presence, not aggression. They waited. The sound of hoofbeats echoed through the rocks before the riders appeared. Then they came into view, 12 mounted enforcers in dark leathers and council insignia, their faces hard and professional. At their head rode a man Eldris recognized immediately. Captain Voss. The council's chief enforcer. A man who had served the crown for 20 years, who had carried out every difficult order without question or hesitation. Voss raised a hand, and the riders halted 50 paces from the pass. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Voss dismounted and walked forward alone, stopping 10 paces from Eldris. He was older, his hair streaked with gray, his face weathered by years of hard service. But his eyes were sharp and calculating. Your Majesty, Voss said, his voice formal. You've led us on quite a chase. I didn't ask to be followed, Captain. The council was concerned for your safety. An Alpha King traveling alone through lawless territory is a significant risk. I'm perfectly safe. Voss's gaze flicked to Patricia, then to the Omega defenders positioned on the rocks above. Are you? Eldris kept his voice level. State your business, Captain. Voss pulled a rolled parchment from his coat and held it up. I carry a writ from the Royal Council. It names the Omega woman Patricia as a person of interest in matters of royal security. She is to be detained and returned to the capital for questioning. On what grounds? Unauthorized access to royal chambers. Potential espionage. Possible conspiracy against the crown. The words were carefully chosen. Vague enough to justify anything, specific enough to sound legitimate. Eldris felt his wolf stir, not in rage but in cold, focused anger. She's guilty of none of those things. That will be determined through proper investigation. There will be no investigation. Because there is no crime. Voss's expression didn't change. Your Majesty, I have my orders. I am authorized to use necessary force to execute this writ. Against me? Against anyone who interferes with my duty. The threat hung in the air between them. Eldris took a step forward, and Voss's hand moved instinctively to his sword hilt. Let me be very clear, Captain, Eldris said, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. The woman you're here to arrest is under my personal protection. If you try to take her, you'll have to go through me. Your Majesty, please be reasonable. This is a matter of law. Whose law? The Council's? They don't make law. I do. With the council's guidance and consent. Not anymore. Voss's eyes narrowed. What are you saying? I'm saying the council has overstepped its authority. I'm saying I've seen what they've done in my name. The villages they've destroyed. The people they've displaced. The sanctuaries they've outlawed. Those were necessary measures for the stability of the realm. They were acts of control disguised as governance. And they end now. Voss studied him for a long moment. The council will not accept this. Then the council and I will have words when I return. If you return. The words were soft, almost regretful. Eldris felt the shift immediately. Saw the way Voss's posture changed, the way his weight settled. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was a choice. Are you threatening your king, Captain? Voss's hand remained on his sword. I'm carrying out my orders. If you interfere, I'm authorized to act in defense of the realm's interests. Even if that means killing me? Even then. The truth of it settled cold and final between them. The council hadn't sent Voss to retrieve Patricia. They'd sent him to eliminate a problem. And if the Alpha King had become part of that problem, then he was expendable too. Eldris heard Patricia's breath catch beside him, felt her hand touch his arm. Behind Voss, the mounted enforcers shifted, hands moving to weapons. Above, the Omega defenders drew their bows. The valley held its breath. Then Eldris did something no one expected. He knelt. Not in submission. Not in surrender. But in recognition. He went down on one knee in the dirt, his hands open at his sides, his gaze never leaving Voss's face. The captain froze, confusion flickering across his features. What are you doing? Voss demanded. I'm showing you what power looks like when it chooses truth over control. Get up. This is absurd. No. This is necessary. Patricia stepped forward and knelt beside him, her hand finding his. And then, one by one, the Omega defenders came down from the rocks and knelt as well. Not to Eldris. But with him. In witness. Voss looked around, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. This is sedition. All of you. Stand down. No one moved. Eldris spoke quietly, his voice carrying in the still morning air. You were sent here to remove a threat. To eliminate anyone who might destabilize the council's control. But I'm not the threat, Captain. The council is. They've ruled through fear and manipulation for decades. They've convinced everyone, including me, that their way was the only way. But they were wrong. You're a fool, Voss said, his voice tight. You think kneeling makes you noble? It makes you weak. And the weak don't survive. The weak don't survive, Eldris agreed. But I'm not weak. I'm choosing. And that choice is mine to make. Voss's hand tightened on his sword. Last chance, Your Majesty. Stand down. Let us take the woman. Return to the capital. Salvage what you can. No. Voss drew his sword. The sound of steel against leather rang sharp in the silence. Eldris didn't move. Neither did Patricia. Neither did the Omega defenders. Voss raised the blade, his face hardening into the mask of a man about to follow orders he didn't want but would execute anyway. Then a voice called out from behind the enforcers. Captain Voss. Hold. Everyone turned. A lone rider appeared at the mouth of the pass, moving slowly forward on a dark horse. The rider wore traveling leathers, a hood pulled low, face obscured. Voss lowered his sword slightly. Who are you? Identify yourself. The rider dismounted and pushed back the hood. Elder Miriam. No. Not Miriam. A younger woman, her face sharp and intelligent, her eyes the same piercing gray as the Elder's. "My name is Cashin," she said calmly. "I represent the Northern Territories Assembly. And I'm here to inform you that this sanctuary is now under our protection." Voss stared at her. "The Northern Assembly has no authority in royal territory. We have authority where the crown has abandoned its duty. Which is everywhere you've destroyed in the king's name." She pulled a folded document from her coat and held it up. "This is a charter signed by 17 regional councils representing over half the kingdom's population. It declares that any further aggression against Omega sanctuaries will be considered an act of war." Voss's face went pale. "That's treason." "No. That's accountability." Cashin walked past Voss, ignoring his sword, and stopped in front of Eldris. "Your Majesty. The territories have been waiting for you to wake up. To see what was being done in your name. Now that you have, we're ready to stand with you. But we need to know that you're ready to stand with us." Eldris looked up at her, still kneeling, and saw the challenge in her eyes. This was the moment. The choice that would define everything. He rose slowly, Patricia rising beside him, their hands still joined. "I'm ready," he said. Cashin nodded, then turned to face Voss. "You have two options, Captain. You can return to the capital and tell the council that their authority is no longer absolute. Or you can try to fight, and discover just how many people are willing to resist." Voss looked around. The Omega defenders had risen as well, bows ready. Behind Cashin, more riders appeared, dozens of them, all wearing the insignia of the Northern Assembly. The enforcers were outnumbered. Outmaneuvered. Checkmate. Voss sheathed his sword slowly, his jaw tight. "The council will not forgive this." "Good," Eldris said. "I'm not asking for their forgiveness. I'm asking for their resignation." Voss mounted his horse, his face unreadable. "You're making a mistake, Your Majesty." "Maybe. But it's my mistake to make." Voss looked at him for a long moment, then gestured to his men. They turned their horses and rode back through the pass, disappearing into the morning shadows. Silence settled over the valley. Then Cashin smiled. "That went better than expected." Eldris turned to her. "How did you know to come?" "Elder Miriam sent word 3 days ago. Said you were asking the right questions. That you might finally be ready to see the truth." "And the charter?" "Real. Signed. Binding. The territories have been preparing for this for years. We just needed a king willing to lead instead of follow." Patricia stepped forward. "What happens now?" Cashin looked between them, her expression thoughtful. "Now? You rebuild. Not from a throne. From the ground up. With the people you've ignored. The voices you've silenced." She handed Eldris a sealed letter. "This is an invitation. The assembly meets in 1 month at the northern capital. They're expecting you. Both of you." Eldris took the letter, feeling its weight. "And if I refuse? Then the territories will govern themselves. And the kingdom will fracture. But if you come, if you listen, if you're willing to share power instead of hoard it, then maybe we can build something better." She mounted her horse and pulled the hood back up. 1 month, Your Majesty. Don't make us wait longer." Then she and her riders turned and left, leaving Eldris and Patricia standing in the pass with the Omega defenders. The sun was fully up now, painting the valley in warm gold light. Patricia squeezed his hand. "Are you ready for this?" Eldris looked down at her, seeing the woman who had vanished to protect him, who had led him through the ruins of his own kingdom, who had taught him that power meant nothing without choice. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I'm not doing it alone." She smiled, tired but genuine. "Then we start walking." They returned to the settlement together. The Omega defenders dispersed, the tension finally breaking. People emerged from the hall, cautious at first, then relieved when they saw no blood, no bodies, no destruction. Elder Miriam met them at the entrance, her eyes sharp. The council will retaliate. Let them, Eldris said. We'll be ready. And the assembly? We'll attend. And we'll listen. Miriam nodded slowly, then smiled. Then perhaps there's hope for this kingdom after all. Eldris and Patricia spent the rest of the day with the elders, learning the histories they'd never been taught. The old ways. The balance that had existed before power became synonymous with dominance. As the sun set, they stood together at the edge of the valley, looking out over the mountains. What are you thinking? Patricia asked. That I spent 10 years ruling from a throne and learned nothing. And 3 days walking through my own kingdom and learned everything. You're learning. That's what matters. He turned to face her. I don't know what comes next. I don't know if we can fix what's broken. But I know I want to try. With you. Patricia reached up and touched his face gently. Then we try. One step at a time. He kissed her then, not with the urgency of that first night, but with certainty. With choice. With recognition. When they broke apart, his wolf was silent. Not subdued. Not leashed. Aligned. Complete. In the distance, the capital lay far to the south, its towers and walls gleaming in the fading light. Eldris would return there eventually. But not as the king who had left. As the man who had learned to kneel. Who had chosen balance over dominance. Who had found power not in control, but in partnership. The kingdom waited. But for the first time in his life, Eldris wasn't in a hurry. He had time. He had purpose. And he had her. The rest would come. One step at a time. Together. The story didn't roar. It hunted softly. And never missed.